The funeral flowers had not yet withered when the phone calls began. 2 weeks after burying my husband, I was still staring at his reading glasses left neatly on the nightstand when my children decided I was a burden to be managed. "Mom, this house is too big for you. The taxes, the repairs. It's not realistic. We've already found a buyer," my son Daniel declared, his voice sharp, impatient, as if my grief was nothing but a scheduling inconvenience. I tightened my grip on the mug in my hand. They thought I was weak. They thought widowhood had stripped me of reason, of strength. My daughter Sophie chimed in, her tone falsely sweet. "You could move into our basement. It's perfect, Mom. You'll have your own entrance, your own little space. It's a win-win." A basement. They wanted me to exchange the home my husband and I built over 40 years for a windowless corner beneath their feet. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know the house was already paid off. They didn't know about the secret my husband left behind, hidden in documents waiting for me. And they certainly didn't know that this widow was not as helpless as they believed. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're watching from. When people look at me now, they see a widow in her mid-60s, fragile, alone, and perhaps already halfway to the grave. What they don't see is the road that brought me here, the years that carved the lines on my face and shaped the steel in my spine. I was born in a cramped apartment above a butcher's shop in Cleveland. My father worked double shifts at the steel mill. My mother stitched clothes for neighbors to keep food on the table. Luxury wasn't in our vocabulary. I learned young how to patch socks, stretch soup, and smile politely at hunger. By the time I was 15, I was cleaning houses after school, scrubbing other people's kitchens until my knuckles cracked, just to buy textbooks. College was a distant dream, but I chased it anyway, fueled by stubbornness more than hope. At 19, I met James Hale. He wasn't rich. He was a junior draftsman with calluses on his hands. But he had a vision, a way of speaking, that made me believe survival could turn into living. We married in a borrowed dress and a small church that smelled of floor polish and lilies. There was no honeymoon, only a rented one-bedroom and shared determination. Life was not kind at first. We faced layoffs, winters when the furnace broke, nights when I stitched clothes by candlelight while James worked overtime at a drafting table. Our children, Daniel and Sophie, arrived within 4 years. The bills grew faster than the paychecks. I remember hiding in the pantry one evening, muffling my sobs into a dish towel because the electric company had sent another shut-off notice. James found me, lifted my chin, and said, "We'll build something better, brick by brick." And we did. Slowly, painfully. We bought our first small house when I was 32. James worked 2 jobs, and I took in sewing while minding the children. I never complained when my fingers bled from the needle or when my back ached from standing. The children never knew the sacrifices. We shielded them from the gnawing anxiety of wondering whether the mortgage check would clear. By 40, we had saved enough to move into the house that would define us. A 2-story with a lemon tree out back, a garden where I planted rosemary, and wide steps where I imagined grandchildren sitting one day. Every brick of that house felt like proof of survival. James repaired the roof himself. I painted every wall, and together we poured love into every corner. But with comfort came changes I did not expect. Daniel grew restless, always comparing himself to wealthier friends. Sophie chased appearances, learning how to smile for favors instead of working for them. I told myself they were young, that life would humble them in time. But pride, once planted, rarely withers without being forced. Meanwhile, James kept secrets, not of betrayal, but of protection. I didn't know then that he had quietly paid off the mortgage years early, fearing the children might one day circle like hawks. I didn't know he had bought a small apartment in Spain, tucked away under a holding company, leaving behind instructions only I would find. He saw the storm coming long before I did. Our battles weren't only financial. I lost my parents within 2 winters, and grief nearly swallowed me whole. Then James fell ill. The hospital bills mounted, but we faced them together, determined not to burden anyone else. When he passed, a silence heavier than stone fell on me. I thought my children would gather close, offer comfort. Instead, within weeks, their voices sharpened into calculations about property, taxes, and market value. It hurt in a way words can't capture. To realize that the children you bled for, sacrificed every comfort for, could look at the home you built and see only dollar signs. But pain has a strange alchemy. It either destroys you or forges you. I had endured poverty, hunger, cold, and loss. I had worked until my body screamed. I had buried my husband and held myself together at his graveside. Did Daniel and Sophie really believe that after all that, I would crumble at the first whiff of greed? They underestimated me. And in their underestimation lay the seed of my revenge. Success, when it finally arrived, didn't look like the glossy magazine spreads my daughter worshipped or the flashy cars my son envied. No, success for me was quieter, sturdier, something that settled into the bones. It looked like a house fully paid for. It sounded like the hum of a refrigerator stocked with food I didn't have to ration. It felt like the weight of keys in my hand, keys that no bank, no creditor, no collector could ever take from me. By the time I reached 60, the life James and I had built was solid. We had cleared every debt, refinanced nothing, and saved enough to sleep without worry. My sewing had turned from necessity into a boutique business. Neighbors and friends sought me out for custom dresses and wedding gowns. Each stitch became a testament that hardship hadn't broken me. It had sharpened me. I could price my work on my own terms, and for the first time in my life, my hands earned respect along with money. James was proud of what we had achieved, though he always remained cautious. "We're comfortable, Margaret," he would say. But never forget, comfort attracts envy. He wasn't wrong. Daniel borrowed frequently under the guise of temporary setbacks. Sophie requested help with tuition, then cars, then renovations. I gave, not because I was blind, but because I still believed that generosity could soften their edges. But success is not only financial, it is also freedom. I had cultivated my garden, grown lemons that ripened golden each summer, and rosemary that scented the path to my kitchen. I had built friendships in the community, women who didn't see me as old Margaret, but as the woman who had survived and built. I found joy in simple rhythms, baking bread on Sunday mornings, hosting neighbors for tea, walking through the market without glancing at price tags. After James's death, I thought this stability would be my cushion. But I soon discovered it was also a target. Daniel and Sophie, cloaked in concern, began to circle. They spoke of practicality, downsizing, moving closer to them. What they meant was profit. To them, my home was wasted potential, a lump of equity begging to be carved and split. What they didn't know was that James had left more than memories. In his study, tucked inside a drawer he alone used, I found a folder. Inside were deeds, account statements, and letters. The house had been mine alone for 6 years, free and clear. More than that, there was a deed to a modest apartment in Valencia, Spain. He had bought it quietly, never speaking a word, leaving instructions in his own careful script. If they try to strip you of what's yours, remember, you are not trapped. This home is your fortress, but Spain is your escape. Reading his words, I felt his presence again. I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't weak. My husband had seen their greed and built me an exit before I even recognized the danger. That was his final gift, security disguised as secrecy. So yes, I was a widow. Yes, my hair had turned silver and my joints ached in the cold. But I was also a woman with 2 homes, a thriving business, loyal friends, and the quiet certainty that comes from having endured storms and learned how to plant seeds in the wreckage. That was my success, not just survival, but independence. And it was that success, invisible to Daniel and Sophie, that would undo them. The knock on my door came earlier than I expected. Saturday morning, the kind of day James and I once reserved for coffee and gardening. I had pruned the rosemary just the evening before, and the smell still clung to my hands when I wiped them on my apron and answered. Daniel stood on the porch, his suit jacket too sharp for an ordinary visit, his smile practiced. Beside him was Sophie, her perfume preceding her, her heels clicking against the stone path. They looked like a united front. Behind them, I imagined their real agenda hovering in the cold air. The house. "Mom?" Sophie began, her voice dripping with honey. "We thought it would be good to check in. You must be so lonely here by yourself." I stepped aside to let them in. Emily, my granddaughter, trailed behind, her eyes wide and cautious, clutching a book as if it were armor. She was the only one who didn't pretend. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where James once calculated our mortgage payments, where we had planned holidays and patched together dreams. Now it felt like a battlefield. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been thinking," he said, his tone firm but coated with false concern. "This house, it's not safe for you anymore. The stairs, the yard work, the taxes, it's too much for you alone." I stirred my tea slowly, letting the spoon ring against the ceramic. "I managed just fine." Sophie leaned forward, smile brittle. "We've found a buyer, a good offer, more than the place is worth. You could move into Daniel's basement. We'll finish it for you. Add a kitchenette, a bathroom. You'll have your own little space. It's perfect." Perfect. That word again. Perfect to them meant convenient, manageable, contained. Emily shifted in her chair, frowning. She opened her mouth to speak, but Daniel cut her off. "Emily, sweetheart, why don't you read in the living room? Grown-up talk." She obeyed, but not before glancing at me, her eyes searching. I gave her the smallest nod. She wasn't the enemy. When she left, I set my cup down. "Tell me," I said, "is this concern for me or for yourselves?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't make this about us. We're trying to help you." "Help?" I echoed. "By selling my home before I agreed to it?" Silence. Sophie smoothed her skirt, then leaned back with a sigh. "It's practical. You're almost 70. You shouldn't have to worry about roofs leaking or lawns overgrown." I let her words hang in the air. Practicality for them meant profit. They wanted to cash in on the life James and I had built, disguised as filial duty. Finally, I smiled, small, deliberate. "Funny, your father and I paid off this house 6 years ago. There's no mortgage, taxes are manageable. Repairs? I've survived worse." Daniel blinked, clearly unsettled. "Paid off? Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't your business," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Your father wanted it that way." For the first time, their practiced confidence cracked. They exchanged a glance, a silent conversation filled with calculations unraveling. They had assumed leverage, but leverage crumbled when met with truth. Sophie tried again, softening her tone. Mom, listen. We're not trying to take from you. We just want to make things easier. I studied her face, the daughter I once sewed dresses for, the girl who clutched my hand at the doctor's office, but now her words tasted rehearsed. When was the last time you visited me without bringing up money? I asked. Her lips parted, but no answer came. From the living room, Emily's voice piped up, hesitant but clear. Grandma sends me money every month. The silence that followed was thick as stone. Sophie's head snapped toward the doorway. Emily! My granddaughter stood holding her book against her chest. It's true. For 2 years, $500 every month. She helped me with school. Daniel's face paled, and Sophie sputtered. That wasn't supposed... She stopped herself, realizing too late what she had revealed. I folded my hands on the table. So you see, my concern has always been family. But tell me, was yours? They didn't answer. They couldn't. Emily crossed the room and slipped her small hand into mine. That single gesture said more than any speech could. Daniel finally rose, pacing. If you won't be reasonable, we'll have to look into other options. Conservatorship, perhaps. The threat landed heavy, but I didn't flinch. I met his eyes, steady. Be very careful, Daniel. Judges prefer facts over feelings, and facts are on my side. Sophie shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing the line they had crossed. But Daniel pushed forward, doubling down, as men often do when pride blinds them. I stood then, still holding Emily's hand. You think grief has made me weak, but it has only made me clear. This house is mine. It will remain mine. And if you press further, you'll discover just how prepared your father and I truly were. They left not long after, Daniel slamming the door harder than necessary. The echo rattled the glass, but not me. Sophie lingered a moment, her eyes wet, before hurrying after her brother. The house grew quiet again. Emily pressed her cheek to my arm. Grandma, are you okay? I kissed her forehead. Better than they think. Because what they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that the real weapon wasn't just the house, it was the secret apartment in Spain. And soon enough, I would use it. The first test was simple. Silence. When Daniel and Sophie stormed out of my kitchen, I didn't chase after them, didn't call to smooth things over, as I had done countless times in the past. I simply let the silence linger, knowing full well they would not be able to tolerate it. Silence to greedy people is a vacuum. They rush to fill it with pressure, manipulation, or schemes. And so I waited, tending to my garden, sewing a dress for a neighbor's granddaughter, sitting quietly in the evenings with a cup of tea and James's old reading lamp. It didn't take long. 2 days later, Daniel's SUV crunched down my gravel driveway. He didn't bother knocking. I watched from the window as he adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror, practicing a look of concern. When he finally entered, he tried to sound casual. Mom, I just wanted to check if you were eating properly. Grief can make people forget the basics. I smiled faintly and offered him tea, playing the role of the fragile widow he thought I was. But I didn't miss the way his eyes darted around the house, scanning photographs, papers on the desk, the locked drawer in the study. He was searching for evidence, leverage, anything to prove his narrative that I was incapable of handling my affairs. Later that night, Sophie called, her voice falsely cheerful. Mom, I was thinking, maybe you should let me help manage your bills, just so you don't have to worry. She pretended it was kindness, but her words were laced with ownership, as if my life was already something she could administer. I told her sweetly that I would consider it. After hanging up, I went straight to James's folder. Inside were account statements, meticulously organized. The house was clear. Utilities were paid. And in the back pocket, the deed to the apartment in Spain with the name of a caretaker, Elena, underlined twice in James's handwriting. He had written, "Trust her. She owes us." I needed to know who Elena was. If James had trusted her, then she was key to the plan he had left for me. That night, I dialed the Spanish number written on the note. A warm voice answered, accented but clear. "Senora Hale, I have been expecting your call. Your husband told me one day you would need me." My chest tightened. "Did he tell you about our children?" She chuckled softly. "Only that they would try to make you small. He said you deserved space to live as yourself." Her certainty was like a bomb. I asked her about the apartment. She explained she had been maintaining it quietly. Fresh linens, a stocked pantry, repairs handled, all funded by a separate account James had established years ago. "It is ready whenever you are ready," she said gently. The second test was paper. People can deny words, twist them, reinterpret them, but paper leaves no room for manipulation. I scheduled an appointment with our old lawyer, Mr. Grant, who had handled James's affairs for decades. When I walked into his office with the folder under my arm, his eyes softened with recognition. He listened patiently as I explained my children's pressure, their hints at conservatorship, their assumptions that I was incapable. Then I placed the deed on his desk. He scanned it quickly, nodded, and tapped the margin with his pen. "They have no claim. The house is yours outright. If they attempt to sell it without your consent, they commit fraud. If they petition for guardianship, we will present this, along with your financial records, to demonstrate competence. You are in stronger standing than you realize." He drafted letters that day, cease and desist notices for any realtor, a formal declaration of my ownership, and a statement of my capacity to manage my own affairs. I signed them with steady hands. When the letters reached Daniel's realtor, the backlash began. Daniel called me, voice clipped. "Mom? You didn't have to go that far. It makes us look like enemies." I replied evenly. I only clarified the truth. Sophie texted later, her words sprinkled with guilt. "Mom, Emily overheard us arguing again. She's confused. Don't drag her into this." But Emily was already in it. She came to visit that weekend, slipping through the front door with a tentative smile. In the living room, she confessed in a whisper. "Mom says you can't keep up. Uncle Daniel says you'll lose the house anyway. Is that true?" I took her hands. "No, darling. This house is safe. Your grandfather made sure of it, but they don't want you to know that." Her eyes widened, the trust in them like a flame. "Then tell me what to do." I kissed her forehead. "Just remember what's true. That will be enough." The third test was exposure. I needed to see how far Daniel and Sophie were willing to go, so I invited them back for Sunday lunch, pretending to concede. "I've been thinking," I told them over roast chicken. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should consider a smaller place." Their eyes lit up, greed barely concealed. Daniel leaned forward. "There's a condo available right now. Great amenities, low maintenance. I could handle the paperwork tomorrow." Sophie nodded eagerly. "Yes, Mom, and you'd be so close to us. No more worrying about safety." I asked them to bring the documents the following week. Their eagerness betrayed them. When they arrived with the buyer's letter of intent, I laid my trap. I excused myself, fetched the folder from the study and placed the deed on the table between us. "You forgot one thing," I said calmly. "This house is not yours to sell. It isn't even yours to suggest selling. It's mine, and it will remain mine until I decide otherwise." Their faces drained of color. Daniel sputtered, "But, Mom, you can't live here alone forever." Sophie's voice cracked. "We just wanted to help." I looked at them both, my children, once so small in my arms, now strangers with sharp edges. Help is not control, and love is not greed. If you don't know the difference, then perhaps it's time you learn. They left in silence, their plans in ruins. Emily stayed behind, curled on the sofa, watching me with quiet awe. "Grandma," she whispered, "you scared them." I smiled faintly. "Good. Sometimes fear is the only teacher that sticks." That night, I sat at my desk, the letters from the lawyer neatly filed, James's notes spread before me, and Elena's voice still echoing in my ear. The tests were complete. Daniel and Sophie had revealed themselves, greed thinly disguised as concern, entitlement cloaked in duty. And now I had what I needed: silence, paper, exposure. My children believed they were playing chess with a frail widow. But I had been playing longer than they knew, and the board was mine to arrange. The real game was only just beginning. Evidence, I learned long ago, is not just for courts. It is for clarity. It is for the moments when people twist words, gaslight you into doubting your own memory, or insist that what you saw with your eyes never happened. With Daniel and Sophie, I knew that time was coming. They had already hinted at conservatorship, already spoken as if my house were theirs to barter. If they dared to drag me into a legal battle, I would not meet them with tears. I would meet them with facts. The first thing I did was gather my financial records. I opened every drawer James had used, combed through files, pulled out tax returns going back 10 years. Each paper I stacked neatly, labeling with sticky notes. Taxes paid on time, utilities current, insurance policies renewed without lapse, mortgage released and recorded with the county 6 years ago. I even included my sewing business records, proof of the steady income I still earned from clients. When I was done, I had a mountain of paper that painted one undeniable picture. I was competent, organized, and independent. Next came recordings. It was James who had first taught me to be careful with words, to notice when people revealed themselves. So when Daniel threatened conservatorship in my kitchen, I had quietly set my phone on the counter. Recording. His voice, sharp, impatient, careless, was captured in full. "If you won't be reasonable, we'll have to look into other options. Conservatorship, perhaps." I replayed it that night, the sound chilling but also empowering. He thought he could bully me. Now I had his threat preserved forever. I began recording other conversations as well. When Sophie called to pressure me into letting her manage my bills, I kept the line on speaker, my second phone running a recording app. When Daniel showed up again, pacing through my living room, muttering about the burden of handling my affairs, I captured every word. Each file I saved carefully, uploading backups to a secure drive. Words are slippery. Recordings are not. I also documented their actions. The day they brought the letter of intent from the realtor, I took photographs. Daniel's hand pushing the papers toward me. Sophie's signature scrawled on the margin. Later, I photographed the certified letters Mr. Grant sent on my behalf, stamped by the post office, copies filed with the county. Every scrap mattered. I even asked a trusted neighbor, Joyce, to witness a few of these encounters. One afternoon, when Daniel raised his voice in my doorway, Joyce happened to be watering her flowers across the fence. I waved her over casually, inviting her for tea while he sputtered. She heard enough. After he left, she touched my hand. "If you ever need me to testify, Margaret, I will." Meanwhile, Emily became an unexpected ally. One evening, she confided in me that Sophie had been telling her half-truths, claiming that I was forgetful, that I needed someone to step in. Emily had her own evidence: text messages from her mother, screenshots she shyly showed me. "Grandma shouldn't be alone in that house. It's dangerous. We'll get her settled soon." I asked Emily to forward them to me. She did, reluctantly, but with determination in her eyes. "I don't like being caught between them," she whispered. "You're not, darling. You're standing with the truth," I told her. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. I assembled binders, labeling them with bold black marker: financial records, recordings, correspondence, witnesses. I created an index like I was preparing a trial. Because in a way, I was. If Daniel and Sophie dragged me to court, they would not find a frail widow fumbling with dates and details. They would find a woman with receipts, recordings, and a story too consistent to break. But evidence is not only defensive, it can also be a weapon. I began tracing Daniel's finances. Over the years, he had borrowed money from me, always promising to pay back. James, soft-hearted, had let it slide. But I had kept every note, every check stub. And with a bit of digging through online public records, I discovered Daniel was behind on his property taxes for his own home. His golf club had filed a lien for unpaid dues. The man who called me irresponsible couldn't even manage his own bills. I printed every record, filed it neatly. If he dared question my competence, I would shine a light on his failures. Sophie's catering business was no better. A quick search revealed a lawsuit from a client: breach of contract, poor service. It had been settled quietly, but the documents were public. Again, I printed, highlighted, filed. If she argued that I couldn't manage my affairs, I would show that she could barely manage hers. All the while, I never raised my voice. I never revealed my hand. To Daniel and Sophie, I remained the quiet widow, the woman sipping tea in her kitchen, occasionally nodding as they lectured me about what's best. They didn't know that every word was being preserved, every action documented, every hypocrisy catalogued. Elena, the caretaker in Spain, called me once more during this period. "Senora Hale," she said, her voice warm, "the apartment is ready whenever you decide. Fresh linens, stocked pantry. I even placed lemons in a bowl, as your husband once requested." My throat tightened at her words. James had thought of everything. He had given me both a shield and a sanctuary. "Not yet," I told her, "but soon." One night, after Emily had gone back to campus, I spread all the binders across my dining table. The weight of them was immense, not just in paper, but in meaning. This was my life, documented, undeniable. For years, I had been told by my children, subtly and not so subtly, that I was fragile, dependent, incapable. But the evidence said otherwise. The evidence said I was resilient, prepared, formidable. I realized then that gathering evidence was not just about protecting myself in court. It was about reminding myself who I truly was. Every receipt, every deed, every recording whispered the same message. You are not weak. You are not at their mercy. You are still the woman who built this life from nothing. The next morning, Daniel called again, voice dripping with false patience. "Mom, we can't keep going in circles. Let's make this easy." I looked at the binder labeled recordings and smiled to myself. easy, for him, was never going to happen. Revenge, I discovered, is not a fire. It's a draft, steady and patient, shaping the air until the whole house breathes differently. I didn't want to explode, didn't want to shout or break things. I wanted Daniel and Sophie to feel what I had felt when they tried to strip me of my dignity. That hollow ache of realizing the ground beneath you no longer belongs to you. To do that, I needed precision. I started with their expectations. They believed I was passive, easily swayed, so I let them think so. When Daniel pressed about the condo, I told him gently, "I'll think about it." When Sophie insisted on managing my bills, I smiled and said, "Perhaps you're right." They relaxed, mistaking concession for surrender. Meanwhile, I was already building a plan behind the curtain. First, I spoke to Mr. Grant, my lawyer, about transferring certain assets into a trust with Emily as the future beneficiary. Quietly, I told him, "I don't want Daniel or Sophie to know until it's far too late." He nodded, his pen scratching steadily. "Your husband was wise to prepare you. We'll make sure no petition, no court order can strip this from you." We titled the trust under an innocuous name, one that wouldn't raise eyebrows if Daniel dug into records. The house was secured. The apartment in Spain remained discreet, handled entirely through Elena. Next, I prepared a demonstration. Paper was powerful, but nothing teaches like consequence. I gathered boxes from the attic, Daniel's high school trophies, Sophie's old clay projects from college, letters and trinkets they had left behind. Each box I labeled carefully with their names. When the moving company I had hired arrived, I gave precise instructions. Deliver these to their homes, request signatures, and photograph the delivery. When Daniel called, furious, "What is this? Why did you send me junk from 30 years ago?" I replied calmly, "I thought it best that everyone keep what belongs to them. These things are yours, not mine." His voice cracked with anger, but beneath it I heard something else. Fear. Because if I could return their past, I could also deny them the future they were already counting on. Sophie was less angry, more shaken. "Mom," she said when the box of piano books landed on her porch, "this feels cruel." I answered softly, "Cruel would be letting you think my life was yours to manage. I'm just giving back what you left with me." She had no reply. The second part of the plan was financial. I knew Daniel had been siphoning money quietly, dipping into accounts he assumed I didn't watch. What he didn't know was that I had already closed the one he used, redirecting the remaining funds into Emily's account. Within a week, his credit card company called me by mistake, thinking I still co-signed. His voice on the line was strained, almost desperate. "Mom, did you move the money? I needed that." I let the silence stretch, then said, "No, Daniel. What you needed was to learn how to stand on your own." Meanwhile, I subtly influenced Sophie's fragile business. At the ladies' luncheon, I mentioned her catering company's lawsuit, casually, without venom, as if everyone already knew. By evening, 3 potential clients had called someone else instead. Word spreads quickly in small towns. Sophie texted later, distraught, "Mom, everything's falling apart. Why are you doing this?" I didn't answer. Revenge doesn't explain itself. It lets the silence bruise. But my most delicate move involved Emily. She was the only one I trusted with the truth. One afternoon, we sat in the garden, the lemon tree glowing in the late sun. I told her carefully about the apartment in Spain. Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp or squeal. Instead, she nodded with quiet maturity. So that's your exit, she whispered. Not escape, I corrected. Choice. Then I placed a slim envelope in her hands. Details of the trust, instructions for what would be hers one day. You must keep this secret, I said. Not from love, but from necessity. She tucked it into her bag like a soldier securing orders. The final step was confrontation on my terms. I invited Daniel and Sophie to my house on a Thursday afternoon. They arrived tense, expecting another argument. Instead, I served tea calmly, the binders of evidence stacked neatly on the table. Here, I said, sliding them forward. Financial records, tax returns, recordings. Every word you've spoken about conservatorship, every message you sent to Emily, every debt you've hidden. Read them if you like. Daniel's face went pale as he flipped through the pages. Sophie covered her mouth, eyes watering. Mom, how long have you been... I cut her off. Long enough to know that you never cared about my safety. Only about what you could take. Daniel tried to recover, but his voice cracked. We're family. You can't treat us like enemies. I met his gaze steadily. Then you should not have acted like enemies. I ended the meeting with one final gesture. I slid across 2 sealed envelopes. Inside each was a simple note. I am keeping what is mine. You are free to keep what is yours. The difference is not negotiable. They left in silence, carrying more weight than they had arrived with. For the first time, I saw something new in their eyes. Not just anger or entitlement, but fear. Fear of a mother who had outmaneuvered them. That night, I sat alone in the study, the lamp casting a pool of warm light. James's photograph smiled at me from the desk. You always said revenge wasn't shouting, I whispered to him. It's clarity. It's returning what doesn't belong and keeping what does. The plan was complete. My children thought they had cornered me. They never realized I had been drawing the map all along. The day of the confrontation arrived not with thunder, but with stillness, the kind of quiet that tells you the air is holding its breath. I had arranged it carefully, a municipal hearing room, neutral ground, where appearances mattered and lies had less room to hide. Daniel and Sophie had filed a petition, desperate now, claiming I was unfit to manage my own property. They wanted the court to grant them control. To them, it was the final card. To me, it was the perfect stage. I entered with my lawyer, Mr. Grant, my spine straight, wearing the navy dress James always said made me look like I was negotiating with the world. Daniel and Sophie sat across the long table, flanked by a lawyer young enough to be their son. Daniel avoided my eyes, shuffling papers. Sophie tried to smile, but it trembled. Behind them, in the gallery, Emily sat quietly, her presence like a shield I hadn't asked for, but deeply needed. The chair opened the session. Today we review the petition for conservatorship regarding Mrs. Margaret Hale and the property on Willow Lane. Clean words, stripped of the poison beneath. Their lawyer began, voice smooth. He painted me as frail, confused, a widow unable to handle finances. This is not about taking from her, he said, but protecting her well-being. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, placing a binder on the table. Protecting me? My voice didn't shake. For 10 years, I've filed taxes on time, paid every bill, managed my business. This house has been mortgage-free for 6 years. And yet my children claim I cannot handle what I built with my husband. I slid documents across the table. Deeds, receipts, bank statements. Each page whispered louder than my voice ever could. Daniel's lawyer tried to interrupt, but Mr. Grant raised a hand, steady as stone. Perhaps we should also review these, he said, producing a USB drive. The recordings played, Daniel's voice filling the room. "If you won't be reasonable, we'll have to look into conservatorship." Sophie's voice followed. "Mom, let me manage your bills. It's safer this way." The words hung heavy, impossible to deny. Sophie buried her face in her hands. Daniel's jaw clenched, but his eyes darted, calculating escape routes. The room was silent, except for Emily's quiet breath behind me. Then I placed the final piece on the table, a notarized addendum James had prepared before his death. It outlined the trust, the apartment in Spain, the financial provisions, all naming me as sole beneficiary and administrator. And for Emily, a modest but secure fund, separate from her parents. I looked directly at the counsel. My husband knew this day might come. He prepared for it. He knew his children's ambition would outweigh their love. He wanted me to be safe, and safe I am. The chair cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Given this documentation, the petition has no basis. He closed the file. Just like that, their case crumbled, not with a bang, but with the soft finality of doors closing. Daniel shoved back his chair, muttering under his breath. Sophie dabbed at her eyes, whispering apologies that dissolved into the floor. Their lawyer gathered his notes quickly, eager to escape the wreckage. I turned only once, to Emily. Her eyes glistened, but she smiled, a small, proud smile that reminded me of James when we planted our first lemon tree. She mouthed one word, "Grandma." Walking out of that room, I felt taller than I had in years. They had tried to bury me under the guise of concern, but I had come armed with truth. And truth, once spoken in the open, cannot be buried again. The storm had passed, but its echo would linger in their lives. For Daniel and Sophie, the day was a public unraveling. For me, it was liberation. After the hearing, life did not return to normal. It settled into something sharper, something truer. Daniel stopped calling. His silence was not peace, but punishment, the kind a spoiled child gives when denied a toy. Sophie tried once, leaving flowers on my porch with a note scribbled, "I'm sorry, Mom." I thought I was helping. I placed the vase on the counter, admired the blossoms, then dropped the note into the drawer with the other pieces of evidence. Regret is only useful when it arrives before the damage, not after. Word traveled quickly in town. Neighbors who had whispered about the petition now looked at me with new respect. Joyce, my next-door neighbor, brought over lemon pie and said softly, "They underestimated you, Margaret. Everyone did." I smiled, but inside I carried the weight of what had been lost. Daniel and Sophie were no longer my children in the way they once were. They had become something else, adversaries who mistook my age for weakness and my love for permission. The greatest change, however, was in Emily. She came often, sometimes staying overnight, bringing her books and her laughter. She asked questions about her grandfather, about how we had built the house, how we had survived when money was scarce. She listened in a way her parents never had. One evening, as we pruned the rosemary together, she whispered, "You're teaching me how to keep what matters." I realized then that James's legacy had found its true heir. As for me, I slept more soundly. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It was mine again, my fortress, my sanctuary. And when I opened the folder James left, glancing at the Spanish apartment deed, I felt no rush to leave, but comfort knowing choice was mine. That was victory. Not just surviving betrayal, but reclaiming freedom. Daniel and Sophie thought they had cornered me. Instead, they cornered themselves. The lemon tree in my garden swayed gently in the evening breeze, its branches heavy with fruit. I stood at the window, watching the golden light spill across the path James and I had walked countless times. For the first time since his death, the house no longer felt like a prison or a prize to be stolen. It felt like home. Daniel and Sophie had faded into silence, but silence has a way of echoing. I knew they would return one day, perhaps with softer voices, perhaps with sharper knives. But I was ready. I had my documents, my trust, my apartment in Spain, and most importantly, my resolve. Emily's laughter in the next room reminded me of what mattered. The next generation, untainted, still capable of learning. Maybe tomorrow I would call Elena and tell her to open the shutters in Spain. Or maybe I would stay, pruning rosemary and baking lemon pie. Either way, the choice was mine, and that was the sweetest revenge of all. This is not the end of my story. It is only the beginning of a new chapter. If you want to hear what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you.